Greetings to each and everyone present in this platform today. I would like to welcome you once again to the orientation on the Indigenous Peoples Education Program, or the IPEd. And this afternoon, we will be discussing about contextualization. So I am Jeremiah Sinisa, and I will be your resource speaker for this session. So be with me as we discuss the different topics about contextualization. Let me present to you the objectives for this session. We have to explain the basis for contextualization as one of the features of the K-12. We will discuss localization and indigenization as degrees of contextualization. We'll discuss how the curriculum by design is contextualized, explain various ways contextualization can be done in school, and the policy basis. Why do we have this contextualization? So when basing to the RA 9155, or known as the Governance of Basic Education Act of 2001, in Section 2, we can find this text: encourage local initiatives for improving the quality of basic education. So based on this act, we are encouraged for local initiatives. So that is also a form of contextualizing. The values, needs, and aspirations of a school community are reflected in the program or of education. And then we have also the highlight text: the schools and learning centers shall be empowered to make decisions on what is best for the learners they serve. So notice that these blue emphasize words or phrases. These are all about contextualization. Moving forward, still a basis why we have to contextualize our curriculum or our learning resources in the teaching learning process is by virtue of the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, or the Republic Act 10533. So this sounds familiar to everybody because this act is known as the K-12 Basic Education Program. The Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, or the RA 10533, Section 5, we have that paragraph that says the DepEd shall adhere to the following standards and principles in developing the enhanced basic education curriculum. And that was letter D, that stated there: contextualized and global. So it was the act that stipulated that we really need to contextualize our basic education curriculum, aside from making it globally competitive. So on letter H, it was also highlighted here: flexible enough to enable and allow schools to localize, indigenize, and enhance the same based on their respective educational and social context. Still from the Basic Education Act of 2013. So moving backward again to Governance RA 9155 and now the K-12 RA 10533, both policies are talking about contextualizing. So if we merge these two acts, we can now highlight the local level. So it empowered our local level. So this requires understanding the local context. So our curriculum is a based on the national understanding, but still it requires understanding to the local level when it comes to its implementation, especially on the teaching learning process as one way of fitting the curriculum to the level of the learners we have in our classroom. So based from those two acts that we're highlighting about understanding the local context, it was now the basis why we have this DepEd Order number 32, series of 2015, which discuss about the key concepts on contextualization, localization, and indigenization. So what are these three key concepts from that DepEd Order number 32 series of 2015? So we have first the contextualization. What does it mean? So based on our K-12 curriculum, which we already have the learning competencies, and now that we are in the pandemic, it was tailored into some specific competencies known as the most essential learning competencies, where there are competencies being dropped, the previous competencies, other competencies are dropped, some competencies were merged, and some competencies are being rephrased or being replaced. So we have now the new competencies, set of competencies known as MELC, M-E-L-C, or the most essential learning competencies. So from this K-12 curriculum, we want the local understanding to understand the particular setting in a given area, also its situation and the area of application. So when these three are being addressed by the curriculum, to make the curriculum meaningful, relevant, and useful, that is now what we call contextualization. So based on this diagram, we have the curriculum, and we will make use of the particular setting. We will relate that to the curriculum, also the situation and the area of application to make the curriculum meaningful, relevant, and useful to our learners, because they will now be able to relate with the competencies that our teachers or our school is given to them or are feeding to them. So that is how we contextualize. So if we cite that in a triangle, in the big picture of contextualization, we have the 2 degrees of contextualization. Again, we want to relate, when we say contextualization, we will relate the particular setting, the situation, and the area of application to our level. So there are 2 degrees to contextualize. We have the localization and the indigenization. So if you could notice, if the contextualization is a triangle, localization is the tip of the iceberg, or the tip of the triangle, and indigenization is the one that is known as the bigger part, which is the foundation. So it is a bigger part of our contextualization. Localization is the tip, just a small part of the contextualization as an entirety, or in a whole. So in a whole, localization is a smaller part, which is on the top part of the triangle, and indigenization is somewhat bigger part, which is the foundation of the triangle. So why is this being picturized as this way? So we will now discuss the localization and the indigenization as to the degree of contextualizing our curriculum. So once again, when we contextualize, that means we will relate the curriculum to the area of application, situation, and particular setting. So the simplest way of contextually, contextualizing is through localization or localizing. So that is why it is the tip of uh, the triangle, because it is in a easier degree, no, light degree, meaning it is easy to apply when we want to contextualize our in the teaching and learning process in our classroom situation when we teach our lesson. So the easier way is to localize. Why? So localization is relating curriculum to our local content, to the content, which is the local information and local materials. So when we say local information, so these are facts found in our locality. Materials, these are the materials, the authentic tools, equipments, or resources, learning resources that we can find in our classroom, in our school, in our locality, or in our community. So this is contextualizing the content, meaning we localize. So we are enhancing the content of the curriculum. So content is based on the information being used in the lesson, the information being discussed in the teaching and learning process, and then the local materials being used during the lesson. So when we use informations and materials within our locality, available locality, accessible to our community, then we are localizing, meaning we enhance the content of our curriculum. So it is contextualization, and in terms of degree, it is localization because we are enhancing only the content. So when we give example on localization, when do we localize? So examples, we use lessons, start with those in the locality. So what are these examples that we could use in the lesson that are found in our locality? So these are the names, the situations, setting needed to give context to test questions or problem solving exercises are those of the immediate community. So instead of using examples in the lesson like apple that is not uh, familiar or that is not common to our children because they don't have apple in their area, so why not use bananas and other fruits or available materials that they can find in the locality. So including are the names and the situation setting, especially when we create test questions and problem solving. So instead of having problem solving that are talking about situations in other countries in Western areas, so why not talk about situations or give examples, relate the topic to your locality, examples or situations that can be found in your locality. So local materials are also used as often as possible in making instructional materials. So example, in our when we want to in mathematics or in other subject areas, when we will be teaching about counting, adding, subtracting other operations in mathematics. So instead of making use of materials in the textbook that is not found in the locality, so why not make use of local materials? So we will be adding stones, pebbles that can be found in the locality, sticks, and or fruits, could be fruits or vegetables, or any materials that is available in the community as part of an authentic examples in during the lesson, or can be used as instructional materials. Local stories, if you are teaching in English subject, Araling Panlipunan, and ESP, in TLE, in Filipino. So when the topic in our teaching guide, in our textbook, if it is about a story, then why not also select a story or identify a story that is from the locality, so that it could be also introduced to our learners. They will be not being submerged or being forced to learn or to explore stories from the Western countries, from other localities in the Philippines, but instead we will start with knowing what are the stories, knowing the stories of our community in our locality before we learn, before we explore the stories from other places. Translating a story written in another language to the language of one's learners for use in MTB MLE. So we are already doing this. Actually, we have the big books for the Mandaya, Manobo, and Kagan. So we translate stories into the language of mother tongue of these IPs, the Madobo, Mandaya, and Kagan. So we are already doing this, and this is still one way of localizing. Now, examples of localization, which is also still part of contextualization. So contextualization is the bigger term, the wider term, the generic term of enhancing the curriculum. And then when we say localize, that is the one way of contextualizing to a lighter degree in a simple way, just a classroom situation or just in a lesson. We enhance our lesson, we enhance our content, we enhance the teaching process, teaching learning process in the classroom. So that is localization. So once again, when we say contextualization, it is the generic term of enhancing the curriculum, wherein we relate the curriculum to the area of application, local setting, and situation to make the curriculum useful, meaningful, and relevant to our learners. And one of the degree of contextualizing is localizing or localization. So when we talk about localization, that means we enhance the content. And how do we enhance the content? We relate local information and local materials to our content. And that can be done in a lesson, in a teaching learning process, or in making assessments when we make use of local informations and local materials in our tests, in our teaching process, in our activities in the classroom, or in the entirety during the lesson. So when we relate that local information and local materials to the content, when we teach content, making use of local information and local materials, then that is simply known as localization. And that is the simplest way of contextualizing because it is only done in the teacher can do the localization alone. When he or she enhance his lesson, so that is already localization. So he or she can do it alone, the localizing, the simplest way of contextualizing. Now, the other degree is known as the indigenization. Still, uh, part of contextualizing or another way of contextualizing, but in a bigger picture, that is now the bigger part, the foundation part of the triangle. So why is it known as the foundation part? Why it has the bigger part of the triangle? Bakit kaya? Why? So this can be answered with our definition of the indigenization. When we talk about indigenization, we are now enhancing the curriculum framework, the curriculum design, the curriculum standards, the learning resources, including the teaching learning process. So it is now a so-called heavier duty, the harder way of contextualizing, harder way because it cannot be done by the teacher alone. It cannot be done during a one lesson alone. It cannot be added, it cannot be integrated in the assessment, in the tests, in the test questions that the teacher will be making. So it is now a bigger way of localizing. So localizing is easy to do because you are just enhancing the content. A teacher can do it alone. While indigenization, it needs a group group of people, group group of teachers, including the division personnel, the regional people or the regional officials, higher authorities. Their presence is needed for the approval and validation of the indigenized resources, the teaching learning process, indigenized curriculum design for specific group of IPs, making a curriculum framework for the IPEd education specifically for Mandaya, specifically for Kagan, specifically for Manobo. So that is indigenization. Mas mabigat na trabaho, heavier task to accomplish a heavier endeavor, a heavier goal, wider goal to accomplish. But the impact is the entire community, the entire education community will benefit from this contextualization, which is the indigenization. So when we indigenize, we are now involving the entire community, local community, to create or to enhance the K-12 curriculum, specifically on the curriculum framework of a given uh, indigenous IP community. So we have, say, Mandaya, Manubo, Kagan curriculum framework. We have Manobo, Kagan, Mandaya curriculum design, curriculum standards, the learning resources and the teaching learning process of these IP communities will be known as, when we enhance that, when we want to merge their ways, their educational ways to the K-12 curriculum, there is now marrying of these IP competencies to the K-12 competencies that is now known as the indigenization. We now indigenize. So we now marry our K-12 curriculum to the biogeographical of the local community, of the IP community. We now merge the historical background, the history of this specific IP community to the K-12 curriculum. We now integrate the socio-cultural of this IP community, the socio-cultural aspect of this IP community to K-12. So that is indigenization. We enhance curriculum framework, curriculum design, curriculum standards, learning resources, or teaching learning process to the biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural context of a given IP community. So that is how we indigenize. Kaya pala siya ngayon na iintindihan na natin kung bakit siya yung foundation ng ating big triangle, ng ating entire triangle. Kasi mas malawak ang kanyang scope of wider coverage, and we need people to work with it, people on the side of the IP community, the elders, their leaders, and then we also have the IPEd leaders, the school on which cited on a given IP community, the division office that this IP community belong, and the region as well. So they will work together to create a curriculum framework, a curriculum design, and curriculum standard based on the biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural context of the IP community. So when this will be done, we already have the curriculum, the merging of the IP curriculum, IP community competencies with the K-12 curriculum. When this will be merged, then we have the indigenized curriculum. An example of which is our Mandaya IPEd curriculum, our Kagan IPEd curriculum, our Manubo IPEd curriculum. So that we can use this IPEd program now, it will be now inserted, integrated into our ways inside the school in terms of curriculum implementation. So we already have the indigenized standards, the indigenized curriculum of a specific IP community. So our school now will be called IP school because we already implementing indigenized curriculum in our school. So the learning resources now will follow. The teaching learning process now will now be enhanced also, following the curriculum framework, the curriculum design, and curriculum standard that we are indigenizing. So that is how we picture out our IP school. So ang IP school pala natin, part pala siya sa indigenization. So pag IP school ka, hindi ka lang nag-localize ng mga materials, ng mga information, hindi ka lang nag-localize ng content. Your teachers are not just localizing their lesson. Pag IP school ka, identified IP school ka ng division, so you are now implementing IPEd program. You are now having a Mandaya, a Manubo, or a Kagan curriculum framework. So that is indigenized curriculum. So once again, when we say contextualization, it has 2 degrees, the localization and the indigenization. We localize when we are just enhancing the content based on local information, in using local information and local materials in enhancing the content. And then when we have a higher degree of contextualization, that is indigenization, we enhance curriculum framework, curriculum design, curriculum standards to the following context of an IP community: the biogeographical context, their historical context, and their sociocultural context that can be used by our school during their teaching learning process and in enhancing their learning resources. So that is now the big picture of contextualization based on the 2 degrees, localization and indigenization. So ngayon alam nyo na kung paano kayo mag-contextualize as an IP school, as a teacher. Ano bang kaya nyong gawin? Localize or mag-indigenize? So we have this K-12 framework, no? Ito na yung nasa atin ngayon. Current state na tayo dito sa ating K-12 framework kasi we already gone through with after 4 years of implementation, no? Nakalipas na ang 4 na taon na implement. So K-12 na tayo lahat from kinder to our senior high school, grades 11 to 12. So we have K-3. Contextualization is present in kinder to grade 3 in terms of the use of the MTB and MLE. So this is in relation to languages in the Philippines. So when we make use of our language in the teaching learning process, when our learners are free to use their mother tongue, they start the education process, they start learning new things with using the medium of their mother tongue, of their language in the locality. So that is socio-cultural context. So that is contextualization under this grade level, the kindergarten to grade, which is the key stage 1. For the key stage 2, we have grades 4 to contextualization is also present in grade 7 to 10. That is key stage 3, no, the junior high school, grade 7 to 10. So examples of contextualized curriculum that is being implemented to these grade levels are the subject on TLE, because this is explorations for our TLE leading to TVL options. So our TLE for grade 7 to 10 are exploratory in nature, leading to TVL options. That is in relation to interests and skills of learners. So when we make use of, when we enhance our curriculum, our content, our subject area, the competencies of a learning area to cater or to answer the interests and skills of our learners, that is enhancing the curriculum in terms of areas of application. So that is contextualization. And to the resources available, that's setting. So kung ang area po natin ay tayo'y nasa tabing dagat, yung community natin nasa tabing dagat, so we are offering our TVL or TLE learning area na interest and skills natin is about their environment. So they could have the fish processing. Pag nasa kabundukan or talampas naman yung community mo, yung school mo, so you are offering your TLE learning area will be exploratory, leading to TVL options on agriculture, horticulture. So yung mga ganon. And then pag nasa industrial area ka naman na community, your schools is in the industrial area, so you will be having exploratory subjects in TLE leading to TVL options on ICT, industrial arts, etc. So that is enhancing the curriculum to specific area of application, and local still contextualization. So these are our contextualization are present, no, apparent and clearly integrated in our stages of the K to 12 frame. So for 11 to 12, mas lalo nang obvious doon because we are offering tracks and strands. No? Yung mga tracks and strands are we base that in relation to the learner's needs and circumstances. So makakapili ang bata kung anong track or strand niya gustong mag-enroll. So that is the learner's needs and circumstances. So that is situation. No? We enhance the curriculum to a given or local situation. Interests and skills of the learners, that is area of application, as mentioned a while ago. And then also the setting, the resources available in their locality. So that should be also the basis why your school is offering such track and strands in your senior high school curriculum. You base that with your learner situation, to the area of application, and to the setting of your community. So contextualization, once again, are present to these stages, kinder to 3, the stage 3, grades 7 to 10 of the junior high school, and to the senior high school grades 11 and 12. Now let us see contextualization in the different subject areas. So let us have Araling Panlipunan. So it is said that this subject area Araling Panlipunan is being enhanced to relate to the biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural context. So tingnan nga natin. When we say biogeographical, that means pamumuhay ng mga pamayanan o ng isang komunidad. That's biogeographical. Pamumuhay. Historical is kasaysayan. Then socio-cultural, mga paniniwala ng isang grupo o ng pamayanan. Tradisyon, that's socio-cultural, kanilang kultura, ang kanilang way of living, paano sila makikitungo sa kapwa, that is socio-cultural. So pasok na pasok ang tatlong context na ito sa ating Araling Panlipunan na learning area. So for example, in grade 1 for Araling Panlipunan, yung kanilang theme is Ako, ang aking pamilya at paaralan. So from the theme alone, we can it's obvious that it is really being related to the ways, the life, and the socio-cultural of a specific person, ang isang pagiging Pilipino, kung ano ang pagiging Pilipino, pagiging ako, ano ang kahulugan ng pamilya, at ang paralan na kanyang sinasakupan. So that is socio-cultural. Ang aking komunidad noon at ngayon, that is historical. For grade 3, ang mga lalawigan sa aking rehiyon. So when we say ang mga lalawigan, so it is now on the topic is depending on the region or the province that the school is located. So kung nasa Davao Oriental ka, taga Mati City ka na eskwelahan, so yung grade 3 na mga gagamitin mong facts and information dito ay tungkol sa Region 11 at sa kasalalawigan na Davao Oriental. So still biogeographical, so historical at socio-cultural din. Now, grade 4 ang bansang Pilipinas. So lahat-lahat na yan, lahat ng rehiyon na sa buong mundo, they will talk about the country Philippines. So it's biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural of being a Filipino. So in the context of being a Filipino, pagbuo ng Pilipinas bilang nasyon. And grade 6, mga hamon at tugon sa pagkabansa. So still historical and socio-cultural. At the same time, biogeographical. Lahat na touch, lahat ay na-relate ng ating araling panlipunan. Perfect example ng isang learning area na indigenized. Kasi it was related to the biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural of being a Filipino. Ngayon, pag gusto mo naman itong i-relate pa into specific group of an IP community, so matatawag na natin yan na indigenized competency. So again, when we do the indigenization, so the group of leaders of both parties, from the IP leaders, IP community leaders, and the DepEd leaders will work together to merge the community competencies to the DepEd competencies to become an indigenized competency. So that is the process of indigenization. But by design, we can already consider Araling Panlipunan as an example of a contextualized learning area, contextualized curriculum for a specific learning area. Another good example that for a subject area that is being contextualized is the music and art, no, part ng MAPE, the M and the A, the music and art, because their content standard are on relating to the socio-cultural groups in the Philippines. For example, we have these grade level standards for grade 4 to 6, celebration of Filipino cultural identity and diversity. So if you are teaching Filipino, if you are a Filipino teacher, if you are a music and art teacher, a MAPED teacher teaching music and art, and then ito yung grade level standard or content standard mo, celebration of Filipino cultural identity and diversity. So ipapasok ka dito, you will touch the cultural identity, the socio-cultural aspect of your community. So if you are an IP school sa grade na tuturo ng grade 4 and 6, so pag naabutan mo to ang about topics sa lessons on celebration of Filipino cultural identity and diversity, then pag nasa IP community ka ng Mandaya, so you talk about the cultural identity of Mandaya, the cultural diversity of Mandaya in Davao Oriental, the diversity of Mandaya in Mati City. So yun, para matouch natin, ma-relate natin into the socio-cultural context ang ating K-12 competencies. For grade 7, for example, meron siya ditong content standard na cultural richness of the different provinces of the Philippines. So, syempre, pag nasa Mati tayo, so you will touch or you will discuss, integrate the cultural richness in Davao Oriental, specifically for IPs na meron kayo sa community. For example, Mandaya, Kagan, or Manubo. For grades 8 to 10, celebration of Filipino cultural identity and diversity. So still about cultural identity and diversity, which is a socio-cultural aspect ng ating mga local community groups. So it is better that you go into the specific as a teacher, talk about or get information about the cultural identity and diversity of Mandaya, of Manobo or Kagan. Depende kung anong IP meron kayo sa inyong komunidad. As a department in DepEd, we have also a so-called contextualized program, and this is the inclusion programs. So inclusion programs can be considered as a contextualization. So as a department, as DepEd, our image is being contextualized. Why? Because we have different inclusion programs. We want to include the following: the IP people, the indigenous people, the IP community. We are giving IP education program. We want them to be included in our curriculum, the K-12. Kaya meron tayong indigenization. And that is part of the process of implementing the IP education program or the IPEd. For madrasa, these are including we want to include our Muslim brothers and sisters to our K-12. So we are also tailoring our curriculum to match or to marry with their madrasa teachings. The programs for the gifted and talented. So what are these special programs for our gifted and talented? We have the Science High School curriculum. The Davao Oriental Regional Science High School, or the DORSHS, is an example of our programs under this gifted and talented. We have this special program for arts, the SPA, the City of Mati National High School. Then we have also special program for sports, the MSAT and Matihai, I guess. They are already availing these programs. So those are examples for programs under this, or programs being offered to our gifted and talented students. And we have also programs for learners with disabilities. So learners are having disabilities, physical disabilities. We have also special programs for that. The SPED, SPED school, the SPED center, they want to include these learners. So no learner must be left behind under the DepEd flagship. And the other programs for learners under difficult circumstances, ALS, the ADM. We are the alternative delivery mode. The modules that we are now using are ADM modules. Ito yung ginagamit ng mga learners under difficult circumstances noon. Yung mga bata na may kaso, yung mga bata na may under sensitive situations like nabuntis or na rape. So sila yung mga at home school. But now, under the pandemic of COVID-19, all learners, wala nang pinipili kasi wala na tayong face-to-face. Lahat po tayo ng ating learners ngayon are under difficult circumstances, which is the COVID-19, brought by COVID-19 pandemic. So kaya tayo ngayon is under the ADM program, alternative delivery mode. Specifically, we are under the we are implementing the distance learning modality, and we are using the modular modality. We are using the self-learning modules, which is originally or first used by learners under the ADM program. Kaya yung sa SLM natin, may tatak na ADM. Kasi yun yung mga module na ginagamit ng ating mga learners noon under ADM program, na ngayon ay consider na lahat ng learners under the ADM. So ADM po ang may gawa ng ating mga modules na yan. So we are also very thankful na prior pa ang COVID-19 pandemic, prior pa ang distance learning program natin, meron nang nag-exist na program ang ating departamento para dyan. Kaya hindi tayo masyadong na left behind. Though left behind na ang mga learners natin because of these circumstances, but hindi rin masyadong left behind because of the present of these learning modules brought by the ADM. Contextualization is also present in senior high in terms of indigenization of subjects. So to give us a concrete example of how are these subjects being indigenized in senior high school, we will be presenting examples of these indigenized subjects. So again, when we talk about indigenization, that means we are relating the curriculum to the biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural context of our IP. So to produce a so-called indigenized competencies. So pag ang subject natin ay a combination na ng K-12 competencies and community, IP community competencies, meron na silang indigenized competencies na kasama. So we will look into these examples. Tawag na natin dito are indigenized subjects. Okay, let's see. So indigenization of the curriculum design, we have an example course subject, Introduction to the Philosophy of Human Person. So paano ito naging indigenized? Kasi we relate that to the socio-cultural of our IPs. So example, yung isang competency nila under this subject, design and content, can be enhanced in relation to the socio-cultural background of learners. Example, for an indigenous cultural community or the ICC, this can be designed and discussed primarily from the worldview, philosophy, and spirituality of the community itself. So, pag ang teacher sa senior high, nagtuturo ng Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person. So, pwede niyang isali ang philosophy ng isang indigenous cultural community as to its designed and discussed primarily from the worldview, philosophy, and spirituality of such community. So pwede, socio-cultural yan. Kasi, for example, yung Mandaya community, ituturo mo, i-discuss mo ngayon sa iyong subject na philosophy of the human person, yung worldview, philosophy at spirituality ng Mandaya community to relate to the content in relation to the socio-cultural background of the Mandaya learners. Another example, in senior high school, indigenization of the curriculum design, we have the subject Introduction to World Religions and Belief Systems. So this would be a perfect avenue to relate the socio-cultural aspect of our learners in our IP community. You can add standards and competencies to guide the discussion of additional religions or belief system, and the example of which is the indigenous belief system of your IP community that uh, that is present in the area. So teachers should not to contextualize the subject. The teachers, instead of sticking to what are the beliefs and religions that is given in the syllabus or in the competencies, so the teacher can add the indigenous belief system in this subject. So to contextualize, to indigenize the subject. Add one or two competencies related to understanding the histories and interrelationships of various Christian churches to the IP communities. What is the role of these religions to the people of our IP community? So pwede yun. Another subject is on the bread and pastry production. This is for TVL, no, under home economics. So yung competencies nila na kakanin making. So ipasok kung ano ang mga kakanin na tradisyon ng isang IP community meron kayo sa inyong komunidad. So instead na ang nasa competency doon ay puto, pero yung sa community mo gumagawa sila ng anong kakanin meron, say for example, suman. So ano ang proseso ng paggawa ng suman na naaayon o ginagawa ng mga IP sa inyong komunidad. So dito mo ipapasok, instead of making that commercialized puto, yung suman ng komunidad mo ang ipapasok mo sa standards and competencies. Paano paggawa? So yung output is yung suman na niluluto sa inyong komunidad. So that is still socio-cultural. Another is 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. So itong literature from the Philippines, so ang ipapasok mo na literature is the literature for Mandaya, Manobo, or Kagan. So instead na you will discuss the neighboring literature of your neighboring regions, then touch your locality, stories in your locality, literature in your locality. So examples of this are the various ethnicities in your area. So pa rin. The earth and life science, the competencies describe how the different terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems are linked with one another. So paano gagawing indigenize ang competency? The initial focus of the discussion could be the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems that are in your community. So biogeographical, no? Pamumuhay at ang lugar na kinabibilangan ng iyong IP o ng iyong mga learners. Then we have specialized subject, another one example for creative industries to performance arts. The content is different dance forms in the Philippines. Pre-colonial suggested dance is pangalay. So aside from pangalay, you can add the ethnic dance of your community. So we have competency identifies other competency to identify the historical background, the traditional dress and music of the dance. So this is historical. So you can have the learners to share the pre-colonial dance of their ethnic group. So that is sociocultural and historic. So as a synthesis under our topic contextualization, so when we contextualize the curriculum, we have the following. We can say that our curriculum is contextualized when context appropriate learning spaces and environment. When the curriculum is context appropriate learning spaces and environment. Contextualized teaching methodologies and strategies, and the contextualized classroom assessment. So when we talk about these three, these are all about the style of teaching, the assessment, and the kind of learning environment we have. So pag itong tatlo, the learning environment, the style of teaching, and the classroom assessment would be contextualized, then we can say that our curriculum is also contextualized. So the product is context appropriate learning resources. So then we relate our learning spaces environment to the context. We relate our methodologies to the context of our learners. We relate our assessment. We enhance our assessment to the context of our learners, so we can produce context appropriate. Contextualization and globalization. So how are these two concepts being related? So these are two opposite concepts. Contextualize, we go to the local, we understand the local, and then to the local level, we go down to the local level, and globalization is to embrace the global international standards in our curriculum. So it is said in our K to 12 curriculum that our curriculum should be localized, empowered locally, and be globally competitive. So paano natin gagawin ipagtagpo ang dalawang yan? So when we talk about global issues and concerns, manifest differently given local dynamics and realities in our experience and responded to in the local setting. So when we relate our knowledge in solving global issues, in answering problems that concerning global issues, so one way to do it is to contextualize. So that means pag alam na natin na magkakaroon na ng study on how a certain group, an ethnic group, paano ba nila nilabanan ang climate change, for example. So that is solving a global issue, a global problem by taking the process of how a various or a certain group of people solve certain global problem in their own social context. So paano ba tinugon ang global problem ng bawat ethnic group, ng bawat grupo? So if we could have a study on that, then we can find now the solution, the global solution in solving or in managing global problems. So hindi dapat makakalimutan ang local setting. We have to understand the local setup. Paano ba nilabanan ng bawat specific groups ang isang malaking problema? So in other words, to answer globalization, we have to go through the process of localization, contextualization. Kaya may tinatawag tayo na concept into context. We make concept into context. Yung global concept natin, magiging globally competitive tayo kung in our local setting ay alam na natin kung paano labanan, paano i-manage ang isang global issue, ang isang global concern. So that is the meaning of or the relation between contextualization and globalization. Kaya yan sila dapat magkaugnay. No? Opposite concepts, opposite directions, paluwag ang papaluwag, no, going wider, going general, going into a wider area ang globalization, and then ang localization is going into the specific, no, going narrower to the local level. So dapat yung dalawa magkatuwang. Okay, paano natin masosolve ang isang global problem kung ang problema na yan sa local setting hindi pa nga natin yan matutugunan. So solve same problem on the local setting so that we will be able to expand in a wider way. Globally, we can still be competitive. So be competitive first locally so that before you can become globally competitive. Yun ang ating concept between the contextualization and globalization, unifying the two. Sabi nga ni Rahil Farouk, wisdom is intelligence in context. So iba't iba ang pagmumukha ni wisdom. So it is intelligence in context. So depende kung anong area, setting, and particular situation na babagay. Paano mo tinugunan ang isang bagay in different contexts? Paano mo na-solve ang isang problema, ang issue in your own way, in the local level, in a specific ways, in a unique way of such unique group. So that is wisdom, that is intelligence. So in a wider scope, wisdom is intelligence in context according to Rahil Farouk. So hindi lang para sa isang malaking grupo, hindi lang ang pagiging matalino, pagiging intelihente sa malawak na bagay, pagiging intelihente sa bawat maliit na bagay ang tinatawag natin na wisdom. So to summarize, we have contextualization there are 2 degrees of contextualization. We have the localization and indigenization. So to localize, we will enhance the content and make use of local information and local materials to enhance the content. Then indigenization is the higher degree of contextualization because in this process of contextualizing, we are enhancing the curriculum framework, the curriculum design and curriculum standards into the context of our IP community as to their biogeographical context, historical context, and socio-cultural context. So marrying the two community competencies and our DepEd competencies, we will result to an indigenized competencies. And as an output, we could have the IPEd curriculum, Mandaya IPEd curriculum, Manobo IPEd curriculum, and say Kagan IPEd curriculum. Guided by the principles of being learner-centered and inclusive, recognizing diversity, that is also an example or an act of contextualizing. So our department is a contextualized DepEd because we embrace diversity. We want to include all types of learners to be part of our education system. So no learners left behind. And my final slide would be words from Undersecretary Dina S. Ocampo that says, the best curricula is contextualized by those implementing it. So tayong mga principal, tayong mga teachers, tayo rin ang makapagbibigay ng isang best curriculum because we will be able to contextualize it as an implementer of the curriculum. It is now up to us to ensure that this enhanced curriculum truly transforms our schools and communities. As part of an IP school, principal of an IP school, teacher of an IP school, so our task is to ensure that the indigenized curriculum that we have, the localized materials and lessons that we have in school, that we have in our classroom, can truly transform our school and communities. So nasa sa atin pa rin ang huling desisyon, nasa atin ang pag-asa ng contextualization kung paano natin ito ginamit para matransform ang ating school and community. With the best of our abilities, let us do what we can for the Filipino learner. Kaya yan, hashtag sulong edukalidad, hashtag para sa bayan, hashtag para sa bata. So once again, this is Jeremiah C. Sinisa saying thank you for listening, thank you for the time, and I hope that you have learned something out of my discussion, my presentation, and as a whole, my session in this orientation for IP school teachers and school heads under this IPEd program. Thank you very much. Bye-bye and see you whenever I'll see you. God bless us all, mga ma'am ug sir.